Hello everyone and welcome to On24's Insight 50 session, this time on surefire ways for marketing to earn kudos from sales. Before we meet today's speakers and get started, I'm your host Andrew Warren Payne, and I'll go through with you a few housekeeping notes so you can get the most out of this webinar. So the console you are looking at right now could be completely customized. So you can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. So as an example, you'll see me speaking right now in the media player window. We also have a bunch of buttons, we call them widgets, at the bottom of your screen, and also some of them will be open up for you right now. So to the left, you'll see our resources list, where our speakers might be referring to some content or other areas you can kind of go for advice. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll also see a place to find out about all the upcoming webinars that On24 is running. So you can add those to your calendar, including next Insight 50 session, and also Webinar World 2020. So you can check that out and make sure you're registered too. If you want to tweet about today's presentation, the hashtag is On24Webinar. And finally, we want this webinar to be about you and helping solve your problems. So at any point, if you've got a question that you want us to cover in follow-up content or for the speakers to follow up with, just make sure you put that in the Q&A box and press submit, and we'll get back to you and help, and that will help us to guide the conversation as well. And in addition to your questions, I will be asking questions of you in the form of some polls. And the first one you should see pop up on your screen right about now. So we want to find out from you, the viewers, how are you doing with your relationship with sales? So the question you'll see is, what best describes your marketing team's working relationship with your sales colleagues? And it ranges from excellent to awful. And don't worry, all of your answers are completely anonymous. So feel free to share, how it is for you, so we can make this content and any follow-up content as useful as possible. So while you take a minute to answer that question and press submit, let's get the panel to introduce themselves. So starting with you, Tessa, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself to the audience and answer the question, should marketing care about having to win kudos from their sales team anyway?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Tessa Barron, VP of Marketing at On24, and we're the company that's powering the experience you are in right now, and we help marketers everywhere build awesome, interactive, data-rich experiences that their audience loves and makes them want to come back for more. And that actually is a great segue into why sales kudos are so important. I think that often the friction lies when sales doesn't understand or questions marketing because it feels like we are almost undercutting their ability to reach their audience. We get in the way, we make them go through brand approvals, we make them use our content. And I think that earning their trust is what gives you the ability as a marketer to do really cool, innovative things. You have to have that relationship as a foundation to then be able to take your marketing to the next level. And they have to know that you're on their side. And on a personal note, my career has advanced because I had a rock solid relationship with sales, which then gave me the freedom to think outside the box and put together marketing programs that could have been questioned had I not had that initial trust in place. So really, really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tessa. So over to David, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give your view. Should marketers really care about their relationship with sales team, or should we just sort of focus on our little area?
Sure. So Dave Fortuno, I head up audience, product, and marketing at Netline. Netline specifically does content-centric lead gen for any numbers and types and formats of content, webinars being one. So when you're out there creating incredible experiences that customers want to engage with, sometimes an issue is actually driving attendance and registration to those webinars, and that's kind of how we fit into this overall narrative. As it relates to answering the question, I think without a doubt, you want to earn kudos from sales, but the basis of all of that cannot be superficial. And getting to Tessa's point, it's got to be about earned trust that's built over time. And also the willingness inside the marketer to want to give kudos to sales. I think it's not so much just about this getting a pat on the back from sales saying you guys are doing great stuff or delivering opportunities or pipeline, but also making sure that as a marketer, you're always recognizing sales as they go forward. I think one other point to hit on where Tessa touched upon was gaining integrity and trust from the sales org isn't just a top-down initiative by winning over sales leadership. It's just as important to me to win over BDRs and everywhere in between inside that organization. If you don't, I think at some point as a marketer, you're somewhat on a race to the end of your career or tenure at that organization if you're not focused on those things.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much for that, David. So now on to Jay. If you'd like to introduce yourself and give your view. Why should marketers care about the sales relationship from your perspective?
Jay Famico, I'm the Chief Research Officer at Iron Horse. I spend all of my time every day focused on marketing best practices. What Iron Horse does is works with our clients on executing marketing best practices for their organizations, either directly or as a coach. Should marketers focus and care about achieving gravitas and sales kudos? I have a perspective very close to what Dave just highlighted, and it's really about the relationship can't be superficial. It needs to be earned trust. Do I care if I'm winning kudos from sales? No, I don't. But I want them to understand the impact marketing has on the bottom line. And I want them to have a respect for what we as marketers are doing on an everyday basis and can relate that to how that helps them close deals and progress the organization forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. And finally, Matt, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give your take on the relationship between sales and marketing and why we should be looking to improve it.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for having me on this this webinar. I think one of the main reasons I ended up starting my business 11 years ago was the relationship in the past two companies I'd worked at, a couple of startups where I'd run marketing. The relationship we had with sales, it was such a blurred line that it almost didn't exist. Even though marketing had specific demand generation and marketing technology and content goals, and sales was there when the deal got closed, we treated it as one goal. We treated ourselves like one revenue unit. And what I started to see, obviously in the market, we still see this now 11 years later, is that most companies still have very separate organizations that don't even necessarily agree on the goals, don't even agree on how to measure success, let alone how to execute and integrate their work on a Tuesday. So I think this is a critical topic. I wish we had made more progress over the last 10, 11 years, but I think that I continue to see companies that embrace the culture change and the operational integration required to make this possible. They see some dramatically different results, not only in their sales results, in their revenue achievement, also in the productivity and efficiency with which they do it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Matt. So, right, let's get started with asking some questions. So, one of the kind of key issues that often happens is when we have the handover from marketing to sales. So, Tessa, you kind of mentioned that you built your career on strengthening that relationship with sales. Have you got any tips to help kind of smooth that handover, or to, what does a good handover look like when a lead or some other stuff comes from marketing, goes over to sales?
Well, I think, and the handover, just to clarify, is not just to sales to an AE, but that also includes SDRs or BDRs or MDRs or whatever acronym you use to describe an inside sales representative. And for me, it really starts with having an aligned strategy from the beginning. And I know that's, of course, why wouldn't you have the same strategy? But I mean, we are working from the same content grid. we are pointing to the same CTA. We have the same goal when it comes to where we're trying to point our audience. And when you have that kind of understanding from the start, when that lead is coming to that SDR to follow up with, or even booking a meeting directly with an AE, you all know the source where it's coming from. For us, we are a webinar technology company. Most of our leads are coming from a webinar. And what that is giving our sales representatives and our account executives the opportunity to do is start the conversation, not just start the conversation cold, but continue the conversation based upon the topic that that person engaged with or an interaction that they had. And that's really now what we're focused on. How can we create and activate demand so that we're setting our representatives up for success to continue a conversation? And that, I think, is really critical to making that handover not just better for the rep, but also better for your audience. And then, that becomes a virtual cycle that fulfills itself.
Excellent, thanks, Tessa. And two things I found interesting just there is sort of like when you mentioned kind of the importance about aligning with goals. And Matt, I'll ask you about that in a moment. And the other thing you mentioned is about kind of aligning on content. And Jay, I think I've got a question here for you that would be good on that. So on the topic of goals and making sure we're all seeing from the same playbook, Matt, do you want to maybe talk about how you work to make sure that both marketing and sales are working towards the same goals and are aligned? Perhaps from your experience when as you said, the two departments and companies you worked with before were pretty much blended.
Well, yeah, and I think traditionally you see a lot of companies really just treat sales and marketing differently, and there's sort of a pass off in the middle of the funnel. So marketing will own the top of the funnel, sales owns the bottom, and so then we see this horizontal split on the funnel. I think just today the most successful companies are still being really crisp about what marketing is doing, what sales is doing, but are more likely splitting the funnel vertically with a slight diagonal bent. Meaning that marketing may own the majority of the work at the top of the funnel, sales may own the majority of work at the bottom of the funnel, but there's still an integration of approach, especially for those larger deals and those more complex deals. But that's getting into the weeds almost too quickly. I think, up front, you have to have an understanding that marketing's goal is not to generate clicks, is not to generate leads. That may be a leading indicator, but you can't buy a beer with any of those metrics. And so sales and marketing, ultimately, even if sales is there at the end, and this is why sales, they're responsible for the number because they're there when the deal gets signed. A lot of the work that got there is a joint effort between sales and marketing. So even if marketing is doing most of their work early on, it's their responsibility to make sure you're doing that in a revenue responsible way. And so I think that it's not just companies saying that, waving their arms during sales kickoff. It's not just a CEO saying we need marketing to be revenue responsible. This has to be embedded in the culture of the organization, not just the culture of marketing, but the culture of the entire organization, the executive team, the board, sales and marketing leadership, all the way down, so that you're making not only good strategic decisions about where to focus, but making good tactical decisions about what to do on Tuesday morning.
Yeah, just to add on to that too, I mean, that comes with how you're measured. So if you as marketers view pipeline as your responsibility, you're going to naturally be more aligned with sales. If you stop at an MQL being the thing that you view as success, that's not going to mean anything to your counterparts. And I think that that's been really critical for me. And our entire demand gen department, it's really not about generating an MQL. It's about getting a meeting. It's about getting a executive in the door to start a conversation. And I think when we stop focusing on the credit that each of us is earning, it becomes so much easier to feel like you're one team.
Excellent, thanks, Tessa. And I really like, as you mentioned, sort of like focusing not so much on MQL but the meeting. I'm sure all of us, could speak from experience that when we've actually helped sales get things like meetings and work collaboratively in making that happen, that's when the relationship starts to strengthen. I don't think I've ever kind of had any salesperson kind of pat me on the back because, there's a lot more MQLs. In fact, I think the first time I a glut of MQLs. It was more like, what do we do with all of these? Yeah, that's a really good point. Jay, we were talking about content and working together, and sort of to take the example that Matt mentioned about where some organizations, rather than that kind of diagonal responsibility, there's that kind of hard cutoff, and when sales teams might be more on their own than in a collaborative effort, of course they're going to be doing things themselves, creating content themselves, from proposal decks to anything else. Do you think it's a bad sign when sales starts to kind of use content they create themselves, or is that something that we should start to ask them about what's working for them?
I received a question from a client last week in terms of what do you see as the most impactful sales enablement collateral that your clients are using? And my response was pretty simple. It's the content that you have at your company that you don't know about. It's the content, to your point, that sales is creating on their own. And as marketers, that's cringeworthy, right? It's content that doesn't likely adhere to your brand standards, may have typos, probably does have typos in it, hasn't been reviewed or sanitized by anyone from product or marketing, and that's a big risk factor. It's not because it's impactful. What I would do as a marketer, and what I urge all of you to do, is have an amnesty day. Message out to sales: send me your content that will scare the heck out of me that I don't know about, and hold your tongue. Don't make anything offensive about, wow, you should have had this reviewed, you could have, etc. Rather, look at the content that's being created, understand the gaps that you have within your content library, and learn from what they did, apply that to your marketing content moving forward. But also, look at what they have. A lot of it's going to be really, really good that marketing can very quickly sanitize, bring to brand standards, and bring back out to the sales organization.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think it's also giving sales, taking the next step and giving them not just the content, but the ability to deliver it in a seamless way. So for us, that means every piece of content, and yes, some of it has been sanitized, because I regularly get sales sending me things that they send their clients, and I grimace, but I hold it in. But I think the next step is, as marketers, thinking about how are they going to use it. So we write a little snippet that goes along. It's inside our DAM. That here's the collateral, but also here's a one sentence that you can copy and paste when you're sending it to a client that explains what that collateral is about. And often just that little step, that single tactic, can mean the difference between sales using something you're providing and using something that they want to create themselves, simply because they don't have the time to educate themselves on the content you're providing for them. So if you do that work for them, which makes their day-to-day so much easier, I think it can go a long, long way in furthering sales enablement and adoption of marketing content.
Excellent. Thanks, Tessa. And I think, that point about sort of actually kind of providing them with that kind of enabling them with those pieces to get that content across could be really helpful. I've seen sort of people create playbooks where they have sort of different scenarios or use cases, and then sales can just sort of like take that piece of content and use it to progress that conversation. Matt, what about from your angle? What kind of enablement collateral works well and helps make that relationship stronger?
Well, I think starting with common goals, knowing what the outcome looks like, and then just sort of working through scenarios of what that looks like in practice, right? I mean, if you literally just sort of think about, okay, let's say marketing finds, a lead that is qualified. What does that mean? What does qualification mean? Where does it go? Who follows up? When? With what? For how long? I mean, so all of a sudden, all these questions that many people just say, oh, we know how to do this. We know how to follow up with leads. I mean, how many times have you heard a sales team say, just give us good people and we will do the rest? And look, I mean, well-meaning sales teams can do some great work around that. But is the message going to be consistent? Is going to be the right message to the right person at the right time based on their role and their history with you and what you know they're interested in? And I think, oftentimes when that level of detail, and this is independent of even tools you're using, just having that process even documented in a checklist, if it's not documented, it's not consistent. So if you have just institutional knowledge about, well, here's how we follow up with leads, or here's the message we put in front of them, I guarantee you that it's a train wreck in execution. So taking the time up front to be a little draconian about how you define the process and what steps people go through, you can make exceptions. You can vary it. You can get creative in the moment with a prospect based on certain conditions. But I want that to be the exception, not the rule. Because that focus on process and consistency up front will absolutely improve results and efficiency in the progress.
And Matt, how do you do that? Like, do you put it in a document, or what have you seen work to execute that practice?
Yeah, I mean, so it's the simplest thing to do is just write it down. I don't even care where it is. Like I've seen companies that spend, tens of thousands of dollars a month on software that are inconsistent about how they use it, that aren't nearly as good as companies that just have a bullet list. I mean, it can be a bullet list in an email that just says, okay, we all agree this is what we're doing, right? Oftentimes we'll ask companies, do you have a consistent process for lead follow-up? And if they say yes, my next question is, show me. Like, I want to read it. And if they say, well, let me describe it to you. No. Send it to me. I want to read it. Unless it's written down, I guarantee you it's not consistent. So the first step is literally writing it down, right? And what I would not recommend is a sales enablement, oriented marketing team to write it down and then say, hey, sales, this is what we want you to do. And I would not recommend marketing sitting down and saying, hey, sales, here's what we've come up with. Will you review this? I know it will take a little more time, but I would highly encourage the right sales and marketing leaders, and they can be sort of operational leaders or a manager or sales enablement, someone on both sides, get together and work on it together. Even if marketing, you walk in knowing how you'd like it to look, if you make it a collaborative process to create that document, it's far more likely that both sides will agree to it and actually follow it.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And I think, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in. I think from that perspective, the root of a lot of the comments that have been made, specifically here, has been about respect, balance, empathy, to me as being the core of all of it. Obviously, everyone wants to have goal alignment at the end of the day. If we don't, then we're screwed. We are looking for strong execution on plans that are documented, but perhaps not overly documented. I've seen some companies actually even have printed out and almost like covered in some kind of translucent material where they're keeping it on their desk, and it's just a ref card basically for the reps and there's check boxes. Yeah, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's just a quick point of reference to the point where it becomes subliminal and they're just recalling that on a daily basis.
Great, thanks, David. And actually, I think the value of checklists, I use them all the time, and it was funny because I was actually going to give the example of a laminated checklist I've actually seen before, on an SDR.
Lamination, that was the word that was escaping me.
Yeah, that's my favorite office appliance. So, great. Right, well, back to you, the audience. We want to find out, what's causing you problems. So, tell us, we can sort of help create content that serves you. So coming up on your screen now should be the next poll question, and this one is multiple choice, so you can select more than one. And we want to know that, relationships aside, what's holding your marketing team back from, working more effectively with sales? Are you being targeted more so on delivering MQLs and early stage KPIs, so maybe that's taking away time from other activities later down the funnel where actually you could help? Perhaps you don't have enough marketing resource. I know that's a common problem. Or maybe sales doesn't want support. It'd be great to kind of hear what problems you're facing. So just, select which ones apply, hit submit, and we'll look to cover those in some follow-up content. So turning back to the questions now, and actually I think given that we're sort of all remote on this webinar and, both all of us speaking and the attendees, we're going to be separated by thousands of miles, it kind of represents the nature of work today. This kind of comes back to a question here I've got, which David, it might be good for you to answer. What suggestions do you have for communicating when you're working as part of a distributed organization? Because, we all know that, communicating when everyone's in the same office can be difficult, but when we're, physically separated, it's even more of a challenge.
Sure.
What have you found that works well in your role?
Yeah, so speaking for myself specifically, my team, the marketing team and product teams out on the East Coast in the States, we have a sales office in Austin, Texas, a sales team out in California, and a few folks scattered around the country. Needless to say, I barely ever get to see our reps face to face unless we are virtually connecting or we're at an event. So I'm a big fan of embedding video into email and offering quick updates on anything. So if there's a marketing win, great. If there's a campaign launching next week, I like to talk to it, give my face a voice, and easily deliver that to the actual users internally inside the organization, allow them to even reciprocate, and we both go live. It doesn't necessarily matter the tool that's being used. I use Loom a lot, and it just simply embed the video into it, and we're using their free product. But the idea of trying to distill maybe complex initiatives into a few quick hitting bullets in a 1 minute or less video, and within the email, having a few bullets that nicely summarize why they should care and what they should use is really the most important thing that I focus on. I believe Tessa spoke to one part of that, which was, distilling all of the marketing jargon and just strip that out and say, this is what this campaign's about. This is the goal. This is the component that you should use or try to emulate. And this is based upon your feedback, hopefully, right? Which is that through working with sales over time, you've extracted ideas, observations, and iterated from those to deliver this initiative. From there, I think they generally receive that type of feedback strongly, whether they publicly share kudos with you or not. I wouldn't worry about it. Some will. And they'll write back immediately saying, thanks, this is great, we're really excited. Some of them won't, and you'll see it publicly just on social being leveraged, which is great. And others you won't hear from at all until they booked a deal. And then they'll say, hey, I ended up using that, and it actually helped us out. And so I'd say just be persistent with it, though. It's not so much about the tools that you use, but persistent and concise communication, delivering value to their needs, not yours, will go a long way.
Yeah, communication, I would say, is the number one thing. I think sales also, and this has to go with being remote and being by yourself, it can be really lonely. I'm remote as well. And I think you have to just put yourself and picture what it's like. They are literally trying to virtually break the doors into an account. Oftentimes they are putting a ton of communication out there without any response. That can be kind of lonely, and it can feel sometimes like you're grasping at straws, especially if you're an account exec who is in a territory that is somewhat dark and hasn't really had an event inside of it, and might be dealing with accounts that are not that just aren't exactly aligned with the ICP of your solution. I think that we as marketers need to understand that just on a day-to-day basis, account execs have it kind of rough. Like and they're giving demos now, there's not as much face-to-face interaction. And so that human connection is missing for them as well. And so sometimes it really is literally just providing a response. So even if you don't have an answer, just saying, hey, I'll get back to you tomorrow. I think that account execs they have a process, and that is how they're trained. So it's something that's ingrained in their behavior. And it is, they are engaging a client, they are looking for signals, they follow up on a deal, and they just it's when a client goes dark that things start to look really bleak. And that's the same thing when they're reaching out to marketing. And again, even if you don't have an answer, simply just replying and say, I'm working on it, I think can be incredibly reassuring. It's when there's hours of no responses that I think sales then can start to think, this marketer's not here to help me. And it's simply just because you didn't respond. So for us on our team, I like to have a 2-hour response time. I know that sounds militant, but it's true because, again, even if you don't have the ability to deal with that question in that moment, simply just giving reassurance that you will be providing that help somewhere down the line goes an extremely long way. And I think the last part of that is repetition. So when I first started dealing with sales, I always thought I was repeating myself over and over. I would get on team calls, I would present at all hands, and I thought I was boring AEs. But then I would get an email asking the same question about the presentation or the campaign or, the event that I just presented on literally 5 times in the past 2 weeks. And it's because, they're dealing with so many different people and having so many different conversations on a day in, day out basis. Often they are not thinking or taking notes on what internally is being presented. So, it is responsiveness and repetition. Those are my 2 biggest guideposts when it comes to communicating and dealing with sales.
And maybe Tessa, one additional attribute there is the availability of the repetition. So just you saying it or members of your team repeating things, that's helpful. If they're locked up in email and people have to sort and search through them, not great. Whether you're using Slack or any type of other communication service, that's great. Make sure that all of this stuff is easily accessible, whether it's an internal kind of sales enablement hub or simply using a Google folder or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Just make sure that they have quick availability to everything that you've created, your thoughts, your notes, and even a rough roadmap as to where you're going and your schedule and things like that. But it doesn't have to be set in stone, but the more that they feel like they are part of this process, I think it goes a long way in creating trust and breaking down some of those barriers that historically exist all around the world.
Yeah, tactically speaking, we have a marketing programs calendar. It includes a link to a brief that is a Google slide deck. That brief is something I present on a call. It's something I present on 2 different calls before, during the campaign or the event. Reinforced in email with the link, reinforced in a newsletter with the link. And I think it's just in the same way that we're trying to get our buyer, sales is our client, is our second client, and we have to be always on for them too. Jay, you were going to say something.
So Tessa, you were talking, one of the phrases you said, and I wrote it down, was face-to-face human interaction. And then when David was responding to what you said, he was talking about kind of quick responsiveness, quick interaction. And one of the ways that I personally have done this in my career is through desk swaps. So every Friday, spending the entire day in the sales bullpen, working out of one of their desks. Once a quarter, spending an entire week there, having the same thing occur with my team. Because when you're in that physical proximity, that's when you actually develop relationships. You get invited out to grab a coffee middle of the day, go out to lunch. At that point, the barriers between marketing and sales start eroding, and there's a bit more transparency. And I know we were talking about that in terms of, how you can drive marketing and sales alignment and relationships when you're remote, and that's difficult. But anyone that's remote is doing what once a year anyways? They're going to the corporate office. If you're spending an entire week at the corporate office, don't just spend it the entire week sitting with your department. Carve 1 or 2 days out and sit with the sales team. That speaks volumes, and you'll get a lot more out of the relationship building doing that versus just walking down and saying hi to them in the hallways.
Yeah, Jay, that's a great point. I think from our side, specifically trying to forge FaceTime, not only when we have these organized events, that's obvious, but I love partaking in sales calls, whether it's actually on a screen share and seeing the face of a prospect, or more importantly, traveling with reps to actual prospects and or clients, to me, it's not only about the selling process and really kind of getting in the heads of both the prospect and also our sales team, but there's so much more to be gleaned there and extracted as a marketer, right? You get not only marketing oriented ideas, but with my product hat on, then I'm starting to think about product iterations and their pain points that they're sharing that maybe the sales team wouldn't necessarily key off of, but then I'm storing that for afterthought. There's just so many use cases where tagging along with the rep and saying, look, I can be a silent resource for you, or I can heavily participate. That's up to you. But I'm certainly not here to kind of analyze what you do. Don't view it that way at all. I'm here as a tool, and let's make the most of this. Best case scenario, you add value. Worst case scenario, you add value afterwards, whereby maybe you've learned some things and that the rep doesn't know this, but your materials that you deliver in the future are going to be taking those experiences into hand.
Yeah, Dave, I love I love that you're saying that, because I know you walk the walk, and I know that because you and I are both in the booths at almost, I think, every single trade show for our company.
Yeah, it's rare.
Is the least glamorous, I think, thing you can do. Because along with staffing the trade show booth, that also inevitably means you're unpacking and repacking boxes full of the swag. But to me, that dirty work is where those sales relationships are made and where a lot of those breakthroughs are happening, and also where I am getting the best source of inspiration about what marketing content to create. And I'm having these conversations and what we've done. And I think it's also helped a lot too. Before I took over events, traditionally, we would just send to the field. We would just send them the materials. We put 2 reps out there. There wasn't a lot of marketing ownership, and it was kind of like, have at it. And so now I've instituted marketing runs the booth, sales goes and hunt. And even though they might not always be setting up meetings, what it helps foster is that it takes that same idea of inbound, outbound and replicates that, but in real life. And I think that it just creates this symbiotic relationship that, again, it fosters the relationship internally, but it also shows externally to the people who are visiting that this company really gets it. I don't know. I think it changes the whole dynamic of that specific event. And then for that rep to follow up as well, because they're not staffing the booth. They're there side by side with the attendee, and marketing is kind of helping to broker that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, specifically at a recent event, I was there with 2 reps and a colleague of mine, and we're all in the booth together. The rep pulled me aside afterwards and was like, I've never thought to say something that way. And I felt it odd in a way, because it's like, well, there are so many things that you've said, and I said this to the person, where it's like, there's so many things that you've said over the past 2 days, which I haven't heard any other reps say, that really seemingly struck a chord with prospects. And so you're kind of there eyeballing all of this, taking it all in at the same time, trying to digest what's meaningful, what can be replicated and shared with the rest of the team. And you're never going to get that unless you're kind of deeply immersed in kind of sharing the pain and the wins and also those experiences.
Excellent. Thanks both. So, those are really good examples of, essentially kind of rolling up your sleeves and making sure that you're working effectively with people in sales, and you're kind of you're listening in, building those relationships. Matt, I know you do a lot of work with sales teams. What do you think we should be sort of doing on a day-to-day basis? I mean, maybe you could sort of share a story, about what you do and what you've seen, other people do well.
Well, I like a lot of what people are talking about here in terms of, sharing desks and just asking the good questions and just getting, rolling up your sleeves with the sales team. I think if, getting their feedback is good, doing that in a static environment like a conference room and a boardroom isn't as good as taking them out for beers. Some of the best feedback, some of the most honest and useful feedback I got from sales reps wasn't at 11 o'clock in a meeting room. It was at 4:30 at, over pitchers of beer and nachos at the bar across the street. I think listening and then following up right? I think, a lot of sales teams are used to sort of people wasting their sales day, getting ideas, but then not ever seeing anything come through with that. So if you're going to get the sales team's feedback, you had better be ready to actually follow through on at least some of that you think that can have an impact. And I think that, generally, there's a million tactics we could talk about, but I think active listening and empathy are at the top of the list. It doesn't mean you have to go and make a bunch of sales calls, but just prove to the sales organization that you are listening, that you actually care about what they're doing, that you have a level of empathy towards that, and that you're able to follow up with some things that are practical and pragmatic that can actually help execute on some of those requests. I think that's where you put your money where your mouth is. If you talk strategically about sales and marketing alignment, but it's the last month of the quarter and sales is grinding it out to hit their number while marketing is at the bar celebrating that they hit their retweet goal. And I wish that was a joke. That's a real story, by the way. I don't care what you say at sales kickoff. Celebrating your retweet goal while sales is still trying to hit their number. Does not exactly demonstrate that you're both working from the same place.
I think there's an Instagram account, corporate sales bro. I forget what it is, but there's an amazing video that gives the sales perspective on marketers, and it shows that sales is in the trenches grinding it out, and marketing is A/B testing a color of a button. And I think as much as you can keep your conversations substantial, that also helps shield sales from that. Because yes, it's important to us, but it's not important to them. The color of the button is somewhat ridiculous when they're trying to get a contract across the finish line. So having that sensitivity is really important.
Well, and that level of self-awareness, you're right. The fact that, look, what I did, I remember I had a job where we were, a critical part of the business was getting people to convert off of a certain landing page. And we tested hundreds of things. The single largest variable, the single variable that had the biggest impact was changing the background color from white to light blue. So these things do matter. But if I go to the sales team and I tell them how excited I am about my new open rates, or if I go to the sales organization and say, we are killing it over here, we now rank number 2 in Google for this page, who cares, right? And so to at least have some awareness of what you're saying and whether that matters to sales, perception means a lot. And even though you may know or believe that second ranking gives you more traffic for the right keywords, which ultimately may turn into a steadier stream of the right leads, fine. But at least tell that part of the story, or go focus on something else that's going to demonstrate to sales, these guys are thinking about me every day. They're working hard to help me.
Yeah. I think
you go, Tess.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's contextualizing that marketing expertise to their real world. So for me, SEO is an incredible source of intelligence that we can give to our sales teams, those search trends, as long as you deliver it in the right way. So we're seeing now surge in brand, that's outpacing the actual solution. And so I take that and then I contextualize it and I give that to our sales leadership by explaining, a lot of these decisions are now being made on brand. Here's competitive is going to be important, et cetera, et cetera. So as long as I put it into their world, I think they appreciate it. It just, you have to take that extra step. Dave.
Yeah, I was going to reference social proof and any kind of peer reviews that are happening in the marketplace. We're big believers in G2. And so a lot of times it sounds fluffy almost especially with the tagging of that being social proof, that there's a review available that's been 100% contributed, first party informed through your actual customer, sharing their perspectives, their experiences. And so if you just simply shared that idea with sales and said, hey, we got another great review, that doesn't really mean too much and it's not too tangible to them, unless it was the actual rep's account. One way to spin that, though, is to actually break down all of the data and say that there's been 78 reviews. We have a 4.9% out of 5 rating for customer service and so on and so on and so on. And articulate that into value points that they can actually leverage when they get in a bind on a call and the prospect's not quite honestly buying the value prop or perhaps just not gelling with the rep. that's a great way to disengage and say, look, I get it. If you don't want to listen to me and you think it's too much of a pitch, like here's a page full of unfiltered feedback from customers that have said nothing but glowing things about us. So if you don't believe me, that's fine, but perhaps believe your competitors. And there's ways to always, take these other data points that we are working on as marketers and enable the reps to actually use those things where otherwise it just wouldn't come up in the day-to-day occurrences.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. So what I want to do is I want to ask you again for your views on sales and marketing. And we want to hear your tips on what's worked well for you. So right now, you'll see the poll question popping up on your screen asking, what have you personally found useful in helping sales to close more deals? And again, it's multiple choice. So, at the top, we've got using sales enablement technology, ABM, any of those, just feel free to hit the ones that you find useful, press submit, and we'll cover those in our follow-up content. So I think one question I think would be good to get Jay on, because we've spoken a lot about the kind of the human side of how to get this relationship working. But obviously, there's a whole swathe of technology out there today. Jay, from your experience working at Iron Horse and SiriusDecisions beforehand, what have you found useful in terms of technology to kind of help the relationship work well together, particularly in kind of larger organizations where that kind of issue of scale makes it much more difficult to just sort of speak frequently on a kind of a one-to-one basis?
Yeah. Think of, if we're thinking from a technology perspective, I'm a very large advocate of conversational intelligence technology. So think of like a SalesLoft or a Gong or a Chorus. And essentially, and I'm not on their product team, so they can yell at me for how I describe it. But essentially, they're recording the conversations that your sales teams are having when you're doing a one-on-one client call. It's transcribing those. It's transcribing those calls, looking for keywords, key phrases, and it's aggregating them all into one database. So, as an example, when you're a marketer and you're saying, "I'm going to sit in on 5 sales calls a month," you could actually quickly scan through several hundred and see if the names of competitors are coming up or how they're articulating their, what they're looking for, their pain points, things of that nature. I think that's an effective way both for marketing and for sales to understand the conversations that are happening, what's being said, and then contextually understand what they can do about that. Now, a small best practice that's fairly tactical but pays dividends. If you enforce your sales team or you guide your sales team to have a structured conversation, and each time they shift gears in the conversation using the same term or the same segue, that's going to make it a lot easier for you to compare how the midsection of your conversations go across all of your reps versus doing it on a one-by-one basis.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Jay. And Tessa, maybe you want to kind of add something from a technology angle here as well, because case in point, being slightly meta, we're kind of using a technology that might help sales too.
I'm actually an advocate of using less technology. So and I say that because we've implemented several different solutions that we thought was going to be the silver bullet to enabling sales, integrating it into Salesforce and so on. And we found that adoption just wasn't there because it really wasn't a part of their day-to-day motion. And the more technology you use and the more places that they have to go, the less likely it is that they're going to go to any of those places. Instead, they're going to go to their desktop and use what they've created and just send that. So, what we've done is kind of gone back to basics. And this is, unique to us. We use webinars. Webinars are a medium that our sales reps are fluent in, obviously. So we have a weekly show and collaborate on that with our sales enablement lead, where we deliver all of the content, all that sales needs to know in every single Thursday. I believe it's 8:30 a.m. And so they know if they log in there, they're going to get what they need to know that week. We use Marketo to distribute a newsletter with all that content, all those snippets. I've talked about the spreadsheet before. And then something that we actually just launched, spearheaded by Mark Bornstein, our VP of Content Marketing. He's actually launched a podcast that is just for sales. And that podcast is helping them speak the language of our customers and prospects. And I think that that's really interesting because it is, that is something that is not high tech or fancy. It literally just requires someone to push play and put their earbuds in and listen when they're on a commute to visit a client or whatever it may be. And it can easily fit within their day to day. So I think, any technology that requires an extra step, just be wary of. I'm not a fan. I don't know if Dave or Matt, you guys have any solutions?
No, I would completely agree. I think organizationally we've been down similar roads. I don't want to say we're closed-minded to new tech, but we're always coming at it with a view of pessimism at this point. Because at the end of the day, right, even if marketing has a beautiful execution and rollout of the technology and we leveraged all their packaged services to actually do it right, if that doesn't get picked up and execution continuously is followed on the sales side, then that was a wasted effort. If marketing did a poor job rolling out and educating sales as to why they want to use these tools and the value of the tools, that's probably a nightmare scenario. So yeah, stripping out some of the stuff that's nice to have, but focusing on the need to have elements. And really a lot of it gets back to when you ask a sales rep, what do they need? They're never going to say more technology, never. They're going to ask for a million things, all the obvious things like, send me leads that are about to close today. But beyond that, it's about just making their job as efficient as possible, as painless as possible in one centralized location. And so jumping around from software suite to software suite and learning new tools consistently is mind-numbing, not only to salespeople, but to everybody. We're all just humans.
Yeah, if it's literally not easy enough for someone to figure out once, don't do it, because they will go once. It looks, they're not going to take the 10, 15 minutes, honestly, to figure it out. I've learned that the hard way, for sure.
Yeah, and if you're a vendor for that tech stack that you're going to roll out, if your vendor's in any way advocating that you're going to need like a sales hour-long training session for them to understand the software, run away. It's a bad sign.
Yeah, for sure.
Great, fantastic. So we're kind of coming up to the close of our sort of Insight 50 session today. But before that, I thought it would be great to ask each of our speakers in turn, what would their one tangible and actionable tip they would like to give you, so you can sort of help your relationship with sales to be more effective. So starting with you, Tessa, what would your sort of top tip be?
So I've given a lot of them. So I'm going to move to a different topic, and I'm going to bring up that of the pitch deck, which I think that has been one of the biggest sources of pain and triumphs for me over the course of my career. And I think that the biggest thing I've learned is we thought that we could just create a single pitch deck with 80 slides and, then a rep will have all the slides that they need to customize and put together their deck for any kind of situation. That did not work. And in fact was way too confusing, really overwhelming. Not to mention, all the animations were just completely rejected. Your sales rep is not giving a TED talk, or they're not giving a keynote. They are trying to have a demo that they can get through and have a room for questions. So what we did was we took a step back, and we now have broken down the big monstrous pitch deck and actually thought, in what stage of the sales process, of the deal process, what are they going to use and when? So we now have, I think, five different mini decks that are purpose-built for that specific conversation. And that has really dramatically improved the usage of our of our decks, and also made it, again, just extremely easy for a sales rep to know, okay, this is the story I'm telling, and I'm doing it for discovery. This is the story I'm telling for follow-up. This is the story I'm telling for demo. And that's been a huge lesson learned that I think has is paying off just dramatically. So cannot advocate that enough.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tessa. David, what about yourself? What would your kind of number one tip be for those watching today to put into practice?
I'll take a follow-up from Tessa, and then I'll go into your question. So on the deck side of thing, I think we've had similar experiences. We've most recently kind of pushed to the removal of the deck entirely. So a deck exists for leave behind purposes, and for anyone who needs to circulate that to other folks that weren't able to attend. But we're huge advocates of recording sessions and being able to share them with your prospects so that they're not just sharing a deck that has no context, no voice to speak to what was happening. So they get a copy of the actual demo, the full visuals of that, but also the audio. Beyond that, though, it's about showing the product, right? We are fortunate at Netline and also On24 that you guys are selling like an actual interface, right? There's a product that people get to experience. Now, obviously, if you're selling, I don't know, widgets or pipes that are just offline, that becomes more difficult. You're not going to hold up a pipe on a webcam and talk about how amazing the steel is. Perhaps you would. I don't know, outside of my wheelhouse. But in my case, we feel like the product sells itself. And so the sooner that we can get a user in to actually experience that product, the better off we are as a company. All right, so back to your question, Andrew. I think quite honestly, just don't be afraid to start, right? Sometimes it feels overwhelming that there's these massive expectations by sales as to what marketing should be delivering. But more often than not, I think they're happy with especially if you're new in your role, starting with something and trying to break down this barrier and show empathy and create an open communication channel. And do so, again, go back to video, use your voice, your inflection, let them hear you and see you so that they can actually understand who you are as a person, especially if you're not around in the office. And just start chipping away at little things. Make a list and focus on, all right, so the hit list for this week is just simply letting them know the campaigns that are coming up over the next quarter that have been planned out. Done. Speak to that briefly, provide some links to resources, and you're on your way. And before you know it, you're going to get some feedback, probably some good, some bad as well. And you can iterate from that, take it in stride, and then keep going.
Thanks, David. So, Matt, on to you. What would your kind of top takeaway be for those listening today?
I want to share something that I think is just really simple and really practical. Like, take the institutional knowledge, take the assumptions around process and execution, and write it down. Like, write down what exists in the air in people's heads, and then get the right people in the room and say, like, I didn't make this up. This is what I was told. This is what we say we do. Is this what we want? Is this what is right? Is there anything we would change about this? And use that as a way to not only sort of try to create alignment and consensus amongst everybody about what should happen, but then to create consistency about what will happen moving forward. This isn't about creating a strategy. It's taking what exists in the organization already and either creating consistency around it or making it better in a collaborative process. Pretty simple process that we've seen a lot of companies do that can have really big results.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And finally, Jay, what would your top tip for the audience be?
Going to what Matt said a moment ago, I have worked with multiple organizations that agree that they have a consistent end-to-end process. But when you talk to people about what that process is, marketing's vantage point is fundamentally different from the sales organizations. And so when you come up with that documentation, making sure that you're surfacing that documentation across all groups that are involved in that end-to-end process, making sure everyone is agreeing that it's the same process throughout. In terms of the takeaway I'd highlight, it may seem very tactical, and quite frankly it is. Do the desk swap. One day a week, sit in sales. If you're remote, when you travel to the corporate office, sit in sales for a day or two. That breeds relationships. That allows you to surface ideas or thoughts, and quite frankly, have someone feeling comfortable enough with you to tell you that you might want to change some of the positioning that you have or how you're engaging the rest of the sales organization. Without that relationship, that conduit is broken.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks ever so much, Jay. So great. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. So thank you for being a fantastic audience, answering the poll questions, and providing your questions, which we'll be using in the follow-up content. Before you go, make sure to check out the resources, which you can download and access there. And also check out the upcoming webinars, including where you'll find the next Insight 50 session, which will be on that page, as well as details about Webinar World. And thank you as well to all our speakers who've provided some great tips and great stories, and I hope you found it useful. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank you for attending and wish you a wonderful day. Take care and goodbye.